right, Nelita, thank you for being here. You have a couple questions you have ahead of time, and then we're going to turn to the congregation's questions.
Sounds good. Yesterday, can you hear me? Am I good?
Is it on?
So, yesterday, when you sent me the sermon, am I not on?
Let me see real quick. Look at that. Now that should work.
Oh, on buttons.
Yeah, there you go.
Good idea. So yesterday when you sent me this, my original plan of going down a rabbit hole of Instagram recipes was thrown out the window, and I was all of a sudden reading various things about Second Thessalonians. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, my first question. So you suggested the thesis of Second Thessalonians is let's maintain the status quo. You introduced this idea that the Gospels are in opposition to this, or opposite of this. Would you feel comfortable saying that the majority of people actually can resonate with or make sense out of Second Thessalonians influenced Christianity easier than the transformational gospel Christianity? Is a justice landscape easier to navigate than a restorative gospel framework?
Woo! All right, okay. That is phenomenal. The answer is yes, particularly for people who the system already works. The chances are that this book was written by somebody about 100 years after the life of Paul, and it was somebody who was in power in the church. And so, of course, somebody who's in power in the church would say to people, just maintain the status quo, because that person who's in power has a pretty sweet deal. So that's the whole idea. And when you look at how that works and how it plays out, there is this movement from the gospel to being institutionalized. And when it becomes too institutionalized is when the institutions start saying, just maintain the status quo because our institutions survived. So that's typically the move there. And this is where one of our favorite authors, Richard Rohr, he talks about how if you ever want to be inspired by religion, you always go to the edge of the inside, just barely inside Christianity, which is exactly where Jesus hung out within Judaism, where he was very much a part of it, but also very critical of it, and also very forward-thinking and appreciative of it. But he was not like the high priest at the temple. So that's really what I would say with that. Great question.
Okay. Okay. This is, I don't know if this is a question. Let's just jump in.
Let's see what happens.
Okay. So the Holy Bible as an art gallery is a striking analogy. Art galleries have curators, as you mentioned, who decide what stays, what goes. Someone decided that Rauschenberg's piece needed to be displayed at the Museum of Modern Art.
Right.
And Rauschenberg's piece is a critique of art, but also prompts the question, what is art? Can you talk about the process and historical context of curation of the Bible? What went into establishing canon to help us, non-biblical scholars understand this process? Yeah,
so great question. The answer is we don't really know. That's the short answer. Our best guess is that sometime around the Hasmonean dynasty in the 2nd century BCE is when the Hebrew Bible was canonized with the 39 books in a different order than Christians have. And then sometime around the 3rd to 4th century CE is when the Christian Bible was canonized. We don't have any documentation of a group saying, like, we vote this into canon. Like, there's no documentation of that. Instead, what we have is notes from these different councils that start producing lists of books that should be authoritative within the church. And those books start lining up with the 27 that we have today. So it's a really unfulfilling kind of road to try and know that, because we just don't know much about it. However, what we can say with certainty is that our tradition has curated this collection, right? The people that came before us, the people who translated the Bible into English for us today, the people who worked so hard to make sure that we could have a Bible today, they have curated it in some way, shape, and form in the fact that they've preserved it. So our tradition is the curator that has given us to this. And this idea that all the books are equal and they're all the same and inspired, or they're all from one author, that's a really recent idea in the Bible's history. And instead, we just need to have the freedom to say, Second Thessalonians isn't really Christian gospel. But it's helpful to have it there and to include it still, because it raises the question, so then what is the gospel? So I would say that the curator for me is the tradition, and I am grateful to my tradition for bringing this book to me. But specifically, it's those two kind of eras where those councils happened. So
I was kind of wrestling with this third question, but I think I would like to ask it. So when you talk about the status quo, the opposite of that being disruption, how does disruption not devolve into chaos?
So I choose the word transformation because it's got a more positive connotation, right? And I think that if anything, if you are introduced to Jesus and your life is the exact same after as it was before, you haven't really embraced the gospel. You haven't really opened your heart to what the gospel can be. I know a lot of people who were really angry toward other religions, didn't like other religions, and they came to Christian, and they just started becoming angry toward other religions that weren't Christianity. It's the same kind of person, it's just different, different jersey, essentially. So for that, I would say that the most important part of all of that is that transformational has a more positive connotation. I don't think that there's any time that just saying everything sucks and it's awful is really helpful, other than to grieve alongside someone. Other than that, to be able to say hey, this is a problem, let's see how we can turn this into something better, has been something that I would say is rooted in hope and is helpful and is ultimately a transformational experience.
All right, thank you. Should we check out some of these
questions?
All right. Okay. Could you elaborate on how including it translates to taking the opposite of it?
Oh, great question. So I didn't mean that including it necessarily means taking the opposite of it. Taking the opposite of Second Thessalonians was just a starting point to see if it could reveal the gospel. I have to tell you, I laughed out loud in my office when I realized it did, that it was the exact opposite of this is what I believe the gospel is. And I found that helpful as a starting point. It doesn't work for every book of the Bible, but that's one place to start if you're this book doesn't seem to fit. What's the opposite of this, and is that something that speaks to me? Including it, though, is me not standing up here and saying Second Thessalonians is garbage, let's get rid of it. I very much want to keep it as part of this because it allows us to have discussions like the one we're having today, which is, so have you asked yourself what the gospel is? Because I think every Christian should. And so that's the difference between including it and taking the opposite of it. Great question.
So this is keeping the ugly family heirloom.
I don't want to step on any landmines for anybody who's debating whether or not to lose the family heirloom, but something like that, yes.
Okay, here we go. You'd mentioned good life for those of us that are agnostic or atheist. The wrap-up of your sermon has a lot to do with the gospel.
The gospel, as there...
Is there a wrap-up that can be applicable to us non-believers?
Yeah, I would say, so if you were to ask yourself what the good life is, right, or what makes a good life for you, what is it that helps you get to that? Because there are things that you have found that are transformational in your own walk that would lead you toward that. The thing is, I found that with most atheists and agnostics, there are a lot of similarities in the ends of what we want, as far as caring for the planet, as far as caring for each other. We just have different routes of getting there, not to say that ours is better than theirs or vice versa. And so for me, it would be what is it that your understanding of what the good life is helps you to be a better person? Because I would love to hear about that because that is transformational, and I would love to hear your story.
All right, here we go. How do you know you're not pulling a Crichton, changing the story to fit your preferred worldview when it comes to rejecting the message of some bugs?
I love this question. I have education. I went to school. I do consider myself an expert in the field of the Bible, and I think that when experts talk about velociraptors, we should pay attention to what they say about it. There are other experts who debate what I say, but I've tried to put in the work so that way you can find the things that I say to be trustworthy, and not only just trustworthy, but trustworthy from an academic standpoint. So that's my goal. So education, I would say, is the difference. Thank you.
I'm excited about this. Can you please tell us the title source of this painting?
Of the one at the end, I found it on the internet. I couldn't find the artist's name anywhere. I found Luke.
Is it Rauschenberg?
Oh, Rauschenberg, the white.
Is that the one we're talking about, the white painting? I don't know.
So the white painting is Rauschenberg, and then the painting at the end with Jesus with his arms open. That one, I don't know the artist's name. I'm happy to send it to you. I've looked everywhere for the artist's name. If anybody knows it, please let me know. I came across one spot that said Lewis. It sounded fake to me, so I didn't put it. So.
How do you go about having tough conversations with friends, family who have a different theology?
So I have a bit of a unique position in the fact that my friends and family have to listen to me talk for 30 uninterrupted minutes. That's not the case for most of you, right? I would say the best thing is empathy, 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 and empathy. You can tell, and this is part of that including it. So I will tell you that I used to believe that the Bible was inerrant, right? I used to believe that the Bible was perfect, that it was all one cohesive story telling the life of Jesus. So to share why that was and how you changed and how you moved is the best way to speak specifically to people, not like, how could you be back there? How come you're not coming along? That doesn't help anybody. Empathy is the best way to speak to friends and family, in my opinion, by a mile.
Aristotle was mad at the origin of the written word because it removed the possibility of discussion. Would you argue that current discussions around Christianity,
I assume would be around the same thing? Okay. Yeah, I would say, yeah, there's a reason Jesus didn't write anything. I mean, look at how we've treated the writings of Paul. And Paul, this is not Paulianity. This is Christianity, right? And if we had writings from Jesus, I think we would go even further down the road of like inerrancy and authority and all of that. And so, the only time Jesus wrote anything in all scriptures was he wrote it in the sand so it could go away. I think that Jesus did that on purpose because we wanted to remind ourselves that there's something more important than just learning the scriptures. And so I would say that that's absolutely good. And the Aristotle quote, I might be stealing here in the future. That's very good.
Can we interpret all of the books of the Bible in the same way?
I think this question is asking about looking at it from a historical, critical method would be my guess, or a literary analysis. My answer would be absolutely, but you have to understand it's all an interpretation through you. Not only that, but you have to remember that you're reading an interpretation unless you're reading it in the Hebrew or in the Greek. So you're already you're already interpreting an interpretation. But beyond that, every author, when they wrote something in the Bible, was interpreting something that they experienced. And so you have to remember that you're reading interpretations of interpretations of interpretations. And while that may seem ridiculous, we have found in our tradition that it's valuable and worthwhile to talk about these things because it ultimately points back to our own experience. And so I would encourage everyone to trust their own experience and to say, this doesn't jive with me or this doesn't seem to fit. God didn't do this whole thing so that someone else could believe for you. This is all about how your personal experience impacts your understanding of God.
Thank you. Why does it seem like so few churches investigate the context around certain verses or books in the Bible?
It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. And I don't want to say that other churches are lazy, but I will tell you that it is a lot easier to just tell people what they already want to hear. It's much easier. It takes less work. You don't have to put maps and charts and timelines together. You don't have to go through all of those different things. And I found that typically when you talk to pastors who speak, they don't know the context because congregations don't tend to value that. What I found to be a real gift here from Paradox is that we have a congregation that values that, so thank you. How many do we have left? All right, let's do two more.
It feels very, very scary to me to say that parts of the Bible are just wrong. How do I deal with this fear?
I think it feels scary because you know it's real. And whether you know it or not, there are lots of parts of the Bible that you know are wrong. For instance, God tells Joshua to go kill every woman and child in Jericho. And to make matters worse, God then tells Joshua to do it again at the Battle of Ai, just a few chapters later. You don't agree with that. You know it's wrong. There's something in you that says this has to be wrong. And the way I understand it is that I believe that Joshua thought God was telling him to do that. I really do. I think he was sincere in that mass murder. But it doesn't mean that I have to believe that God actually told Joshua that. And so I'm able to separate those two levels. And I know that if you've gone through your whole life with this understanding of I agree with everything in the Bible, I would say there's a lot more than just those two stories that shows that that's the case, one of which is Second Thessalonians. And I want you to know I have been scared. Like, I was told if I went down that road, I would be a heretic. I would walk away from the church. I would never find Jesus there. And I will tell you, I found the Bible to be much more beautiful when you embrace the parts that are wrong. Last question.
What keeps us from just using the Bible as a personal preference if we take your approach to Second Thessalonians?
Nothing, really, is the answer. But I think that this is why it's so important to live in community. I mean, here at Paradox, we have 3 practices that we do together, which are scripture, prayer, and church. I hope you don't hear me saying, this part's wrong, just pick and choose whatever you want, like, just, it doesn't matter, and then go and we'll see you next week, right? We live in community together. And there will be times that you may say something about Second Thessalonians and somebody else will say, well, actually, I like this verse. And it may change your mind and impact the way that you see things. When you live in community and you allow people to tell you when you're wrong or that they have a different perspective, that's when it doesn't run amok. It's when you say to yourself, you know what, I understand the Bible better than anybody else. That's when it becomes a problem. And so as a community, I would say, whether it's Paradox or somewhere else, always make sure that you're in community and talking to people about it, and always be open to other people's perspective, because the minute you're not is the minute when it becomes lethal. So, great questions. Thank you, Nelita. Thank you to all of you. This has been wonderful, and we'll sing one more song together.